A large part of what I did as an elder care attorney was I did veterans benefits, and I also taught lawyers nationwide on how to do this very specific type of VA benefit for senior veterans who had served during a wartime period. And there's additional tax-free income that they can receive to help them offset long-term care costs like home health care, assisted living care, nursing home care. And prior to me becoming a lawyer, I actually was in the military for 6 years, active duty in the Air Force. And prior to that, I actually was a nurse's aide in a nursing home, and I did home health care. So it all ties in together as to my path forward. But what we do there, it's called Patriot Angels. We help families assess whether someone can be eligible for that pension benefit.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm Jonathan Hawkins, your host. We've got a really great guest today. We've got somebody who has not only sold a law firm personally, but also helps other lawyers sell their law firms and maybe buy them too. So, Victoria Collier, why don't you give us a brief introduction and then we'll dive in from there.
Sure, that sounds great. Thanks for having me, Jonathan. I am Victoria Collier. I'm the founder of Quid Pro Quo, which is a company that helps lawyers figure out what the value of their law firm is and then position to transition, which often means either transitioning out of their role as lawyer and ultimately transition out as owner so that they can sell and go have what I call a life after law. And prior to that, yes, I did create my own law firm directly out of law school in estate planning, elder law, and I did that for 18 years, and I sold my law firm in 2020. And so during that time of having a law firm for 18 years, I also was co-owner of other businesses specifically that helped lawyers build their practices and just have better practices.
All right, I want to delve into all of that stuff. So are you currently practicing at all?
I am licensed, and on occasion I'll take a bleeding heart case, but no, I don't. I don't practice a whole lot, but I am co-owner of a business in Tennessee that's a paralegal business, and my partner there, who is a non-lawyer, she and I and one other partner are applying to open a law firm in Arizona where non-lawyers can own law firms. So I hope to answer that question differently when you ask me in about 6 to 8 months.
I do want to dive into the non-lawyer ownership question. We'll get to that in a little while. But so tell me about that paralegal business. Just how does that work?
So a large part of what I did as an elder care attorney was I did veterans benefits, and I also taught lawyers nationwide on how to do this very specific type of VA benefit for senior veterans who had served during a wartime period. And there's additional tax-free income that they can receive to help them offset long-term care costs like home health care, assisted living care, nursing home care. And prior to me becoming a lawyer, I actually was in the military for 6 years, active duty in the Air Force. And prior to that, I actually was a nurse's aide in a nursing home, and I did home health care. So it all ties in together as to my path forward. But what we do there, it's called Patriot Angels. We help families assess whether someone can be eligible for that pension benefit, and then we help them apply for it. I am an accredited agent through the Veterans Administration, and we assist with applications and things like that. But we can't do any legal work, so we can't do any planning for people who are not currently eligible. And that's why having a law firm is so beneficial. That ties in nicely with that business.
So you did a lot of different things before law school. What led you to become a lawyer?
Well, I was a paralegal in the private sector doing workers' compensation. And what I realized was that I was essentially doing everything except walking into court and arguing the case. I was preparing the depositions for my lawyer. I was handling all the client communications in between hearings. And I thought, if I'm going to be doing everything except walking to court, I'd like some more responsibility. And with that responsibility, I'd like the compensation that goes with that. Yeah. But really, Jonathan, the thing is this. I have always, ever since my very first job, which was my first real job at Burger King when I was 17, was, if there was always a position higher than the one I held, I was always vying for that. And so as a paralegal, it just, there was a position that was higher than that. And that's called attorney. So it was just always stepping those steps.
That's cool. So
climbing that ladder.
Yeah. So you went to law school and, you had worked in law firms. You'd done a bunch of stuff before. So you came out. Did you know what you wanted to do? And then what did you do?
Not at all.
What did you do your first job?
Well, out of law school?
Out of law school, yeah.
I did know coming out of law school what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do going in law school. I thought I did. I thought I wanted the corporate job where I could wear my nice little suits and walk downtown, because my mother, even though she wasn't a college graduate or anything, she worked downtown in Houston, Texas, where I was raised, and she wore the nice little suits, and I wanted on some level to be like her. So I took corporate law classes, and oh my gosh, I fell asleep in them. Nothing interested me other than white collar crime, like insider trading. And I'm like, oh, I should stay away from that then, if that's what excites me. And it wasn't the prosecuting of it. It was, everything else. So, but I had, I tended to gravitate towards clerkships that had to do with serving people who had disabilities. And so I had a job where people were being discriminated against in employment because of disabilities. And I thought I would just go back and do workers' comp, because that's what I was doing before I went to law school. But I had gone to law school in Nebraska. I wanted to be back in Georgia, which is where I was when I was a paralegal. And so I kept looking for jobs in the workers' comp area in Atlanta. And I kept hearing the same thing is, we want someone who can work for us our third year so that you can then become an associate after that. And I couldn't guarantee that I could do my third year in Georgia from Nebraska. But as it so happened, I sat in my apartment on the floor in Nebraska, and I was talking to my partner, who was a assistant district attorney, not making a whole ton of money. And I was just like, crying, saying, well, let's pretend money doesn't mean anything. What do I want to do? And basically I just said, I want to work with old people. And so my partner did a lot of research, and she found that there was basically 5 lawyers in the whole state of Georgia that focused exclusively on elder law. And so I flooded the market with my resume for all of them. I got a summer internship with one of them. And while I was down interviewing, I went and I saw the elder law professor at Georgia State. And I sat in her office, and crying sounds like it's a thing, but I cried. And so bottom line is, she needed a research assistant, and I became her research assistant. So I did, in fact, get to go to law school my third year in Georgia at Georgia State. And then I worked for that lawyer for a full year before graduation. And so I did know when I graduated that I wanted to do elder law. The question was, do I do it for him, or do I do it for myself, or do I do it for someone else? And bottom line was, they were all sole practitioners, and they all wanted to stay sole practitioners. And so I opened my own firm right outside law school.
So I've heard you talk about this. So how did you do that? So, you graduate in the spring, but you don't, you take the bar in July and then hopefully pass it and get your license in October-ish. So how did you structure that so you could do that?
Right. So, I didn't have any money saved up, and I went to law school all on loans. And so I actually found a lawyer who I didn't go out seeking. There was a lawyer that worked in the same building that I worked in, and he was doing family law. It was a second career for him. He had worked for the government. And when he retired from the government, he started working for his son doing family law. Well, once he did that, his son left, abandoned him with the family law cases. And he was miserable. And so I said, well, don't be miserable. Come work for me. I need a bar license, and this is the feel-good kind of law. People give us cookies and stuff. And he knew the lawyer I was working with, so he had seen how happy the lawyer I worked for was all the time. And so that's what we did, is I worked under his bar license until I became licensed, and then we became partners for a year. And after that year, we both decided it was time for him to retire.
So what did he do with his current family law cases when he came over? Did he get rid of all of them?
Well, he resolved them all and just didn't take any new ones.
Nice, yeah.
Which is, the traditional way that people close their practices, right? They don't even think that, hey, I can sell this thing. So he did the normal, let me just wind down and let these, fizzle out. And so that's what he did.
So when he retired, did you have to buy him out or anything like that? Or did he just sort of close up and walk out?
So I didn't have to buy him out. Ultimately, what I did was I showed him a chart that showed what percentage of clients I bring in, what percentage of clients I work on, and how much I pay him. And so it just made sense that I not continue that path. And he, took what was his and retired. I didn't have to pay him anything. And the interesting and wonderful thing was that he continued to do pro bono work at the VA. He continued to be very active in his church. And so he continued to send me clients regularly.
And so what was the interplay between the elder law, practice and the VA practice? Are they similar, or are they similar enough to where they sort of work off each other?
Well, the type of veterans benefits that we did is essentially a subset of elder law. So it's a specialty within. So I'm a big believer in niching. So as an example, estate planning is a niche of law. Within estate planning, you have elder law. Within elder law, you have special needs planning, you have guardianship, you have veterans benefits, you have Medicaid, so you have probate. So VA was just one of the niches within.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in niche practice also. I know a lot of lawyers are scared to do it, but, huge believer in that. So this guy leaves, you're on your own, I guess, at that point. What was sort of the evolution of the firm after that?
So that was in 2003, and I had big vision, and so I started just building up the practice with legal assistants and paralegals. I had been a paralegal, so I really felt comfortable with paralegals, could relate and treat them with respect, which I think makes a big difference in the success of a firm. And so that's what I did. And so I went from essentially, he and I were together, we made about $150,000 the first year, to then I built it up to where when I sold it, I had been making on average around 1.3 for 5 years before I sold it in 2020. So we had a social worker on staff. I had another associate or two here and there, but I was very heavy on paralegals, legal admin, and receptionists.
How did you market the practice? How did you get your cases? Was this a referral? Did you get presentation type thing? Was it internet? What was sort of your lead source?
It was all of it. I started off, and I think that, at different stages of your business, depending on how much revenue you're making, depending on your staff, and depending on the technology you can use, there's certain things that I think are appropriate at certain levels. So I started off with getting, a newsletter that I sent in color through the snail mail, and people loved it. And it wasn't that standard thing that you can buy that 10 other elder law attorneys are using the same thing. We drafted each one. It had personality in it. I was personable, so it wasn't always just about law. In fact, it was mostly about things that are happening, about me, the firm, things like that. So newsletter was number one, and I still think that's a wonderful tool to use.
Let me ask you a few questions on that. So I get a lot of those. I haven't done one myself. A lot of people tell me I should. I guess the first thing is, how often did you send it, and who did you send it to, and how did you build the list of people to send it to?
So originally, I was sending it monthly. There were times that we went down to quarterly, but then ultimately I always wanted to send it monthly. That just was the best result. When we sent it out, we always got referrals and clients back from it. And it started off being like 1 page, then it was front and back, then it was ultimately 4 pages when I finished. And it wasn't just me writing the articles at that point. Over time, my social worker would write articles, my Medicaid paralegal would write articles, my estate planning paralegal, so we were all involved. We would highlight our referral sources, so we'd have an article from them or about them. We sometimes had a crossword puzzle or a recipe, things like that. And so we sent it out monthly. First and foremost, all of our clients received it on a monthly basis. Also, our referral sources received it. Anybody that we could get on our list, we did. So if we gave seminars, I was very big in giving seminars out in the community as well. So if we were able to collect their information, they got on the newsletter list as well.
That's cool. So I want to talk a little bit. I've heard you talk about we'll call this evolution of your firm and maybe your role in it. And there are a lot of lawyers out there that think, they have to be the one that closes the client, I guess the first thing. And that's one mindset thing that a lot of lawyers have. Another is, I've got to be the one that talks to the client. Another one's, I've got to be the one that does all the work. And so take us through sort of your evolution as the law firm owner through those pieces.
So in the beginning, I certainly was, the person who met with all of our clients for consultations and did the sales call, if you will, and closed them. And then, of course, as the lawyer, I did the design work, gave the legal strategy. Early on, I definitely, wanted someone else doing the production. So in estate planning, that's drafting the documents then for my review. And then there's, in at least estate planning, we would sign the documents with our clients. And so in the beginning, I was part of those too. You have to have 3 people because you have to have 2 witnesses and a notary. So I was one of those 3 in the beginning because I only had like 3 staff members, so you take what you can. And sometimes if I didn't even have those, I'd, call on family members or neighbors or somebody. And so I was very involved in all of it. I was definitely involved in doing all the marketing, definitely the visionary and the message, the controller of the message that gets out there. Which means I also was going to nursing homes and assisted livings and visiting with my clients. I was the social worker visiting my clients on a monthly basis that were considered shut-ins. I was out there all the time. So as we started to build, the very first person I hired was an accountant, because when my partner left, he was doing all the accounting through QuickBooks. And as soon as he left, I tried to do that stuff. And even though my original degree was supposed to be in accounting, I apparently didn't pay enough attention, and I was doing double entries, and I had all kinds of mess. It was kind of comical, actually. And so I hired an outside accountant, a third party, someone. I would never have an inside accountant in my law practice, no matter how big we get. And so then the second person I hired was a receptionist, so that I didn't have to answer my own phones, but more importantly, so I didn't have to schedule my own appointments, because we are our worst enemy when it comes to setting boundaries, and we just want to help people. And we're like, of course you can fit in. Of course I can. And so I had, yeah. So I set out, my policies and my procedures, and, I had someone else stick to those for me and do all the, confirmation of appointment letters, because I feel that, one of the things you hear all the time is the number one bar complaint is lawyers don't return phone calls, which to me is a broader message of we just don't communicate enough, period. It's not just the returning of the phone calls, but it's being proactive in every possible way you can with a client, with a customer. And so I was very proactive with that. So, we'd make an appointment, we'd confirm the appointment. I actually then, created what we call a wow package to send to the client before they even got to us. So that's part of my marketing. As you asked about, well, what did you do for marketing? Part of the marketing was sending out a wow package for people who'd already scheduled an appointment. So that way, when they got to the office, they felt like they already knew who we were. So it wasn't a matter of, are you going to hire us? It was just a matter of signing the paperwork at that point, right? So I needed someone else to do all that kind of work for me, because while I do know lawyers that, they'll stuff the envelopes and they'll do all this stuff, it's not the highest best use. And if I could be networking with someone, if I could be sitting down making a sale, that's definitely a higher best use of my time than stuffing boxes to get out to people. So then it just went from there. I hired paralegals. I tried to hire associates, and in fact I did over the years hire lots of associates. I just didn't manage them well because I wasn't a strong enough leader. And so I started working on my leadership skills, even though I was in the military.
Can I pause there for a second?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The hiring of the associates, I want to dive in that just a second. So was it, maybe unpack that a little bit, was it, as a supervisor, as someone who's hired associates, sometimes you feel like it's, what did I do to not let them succeed? But, and there's two sides of the coin, but, part of it might be something I have done or not done. And then the other side is maybe they're just not the right fit, or maybe they just want to do something else. What kind of experience did you have there?
So first of all, I take the philosophy that it's always me. It's 100% my responsibility for someone's success or failure. And so where my failures were is that I expected everyone to be a mature adult that could be independent and have initiative and be as eager to be as great at what their role was as I wanted to be in my role. And not everyone is like that. And so number one, I didn't identify that soon enough. Number two, I didn't, I would see the good and hold on way too long and beyond what, was ever repairable or mendable, moldable. And so those kinds of things. And so that's where I said I needed to learn more leadership skills, is that I needed to learn, first and foremost, how to hold myself accountable, because I can't hold other people accountable unless I hold myself accountable. And I had to learn that I wasn't holding myself accountable in all the ways that I wanted them to be accountable. So I had to turn that mirror on me. And so once I realized that, then I started doing that. And then you start accepting less, meaning you start accepting behaviors that are not acceptable. And then people don't like you. Well, I wanted people to like me. And then so I had to have awareness around that. Well, this isn't a popularity contest. You can be a good leader. People can still like you, but they don't have to like you. And you can have a mutual respect for why you're here and what the vision is. And so I had to learn that, and I had to learn how to fire people without crying, or at least not in front of them. So there was that. And I've had people that, almost hit me when I had difficult conversations with them, like literally almost physically hit me.
Wow.
And so it was standing strong in your conviction of what is best for the business, period, the end, and taking the emotions that hold you back from making the best decisions for the business out of the equation. And that doesn't mean you are emotionless. It just means that regardless of your emotions, you are doing the right thing for the business all the time.
That's very insightful. But let's get back to sort of the evolution of your firm. And I think I've heard you say that at some point you sort of stepped out of sort of the sales or the closing role with the clients. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
So I started traveling a lot because I had created a training conference for other lawyers on the veterans benefits piece. And so I was out of the office a lot. And then I took a 2-week vacation to go to Greece, and I realized I need to make money when I'm not here, right? And so where it started making money while I wasn't there was that we would just start doing the signings without me. So I trained someone else to be able to lead the signing appointments. And because we got our second check on the signing appointments. So at least I knew if we're not getting new business, at least we can close the old business and still get money in the door. And then as far as the consultations, where the light bulb went off for me was that I had a very systematized intake process where I had a receptionist that did a very preliminary intake and then got it to my intake specialist who spent more time with the person to really see, can we help them? Is this the right fit? Well, what we realized was that when they were probate type clients, those who needed to go through probate, then we would pass them off to my probate paralegal to do the intake. Well, she was so good at it that people were, by the end of the intake, saying, can I just hire you? And so she was like, yes. And we would just take credit cards over the phone. And so I learned two things there. Number one was I don't have to do the sale. And number two is they don't even have to come in. And this is pre-COVID. This is like way before Zoom was ever a thing. And we weren't using Skype either. And so I learned, okay, so I can actually do consultations from wherever I want to in the world because people are hiring us on the phone without even seeing us. And number two, I don't have to be the one doing it. So we started off with probate because that seemed to be easy. You don't have to give any legal advice in order to determine, does someone have to go through probate or not? You just have to ask the question, does the deceased person have any assets in their name without joint owners or named beneficiary? Well, it sounds like then that might go through probate. So if you want to help us with that, this is our charge, and we can set your appointment on such and such. You send us your client questionnaire in advance. We'll have the petition ready when you get here. Does that sound like something you want to do? Yes, it does. So then my paralegal would run with making the petition. I would review it. I would meet the client when they came to review it, and we'd go from there. So then after that concept, I thought, well, that's great. Where else can I step out? And so my Medicaid and Veterans Benefits paralegals came next. And I said, okay, again, we don't have to give legal advice here. It's a clear-cut line. If you're above a certain amount of assets, you don't qualify. If you're below a certain amount of assets, you do qualify. So if you don't, there are tools we can put in place that's allowable by the laws. Do you want us to help you with those tools? Yes, I do. Great. Well, here's what we charge. And when you come in to meet with the lawyer for the strategy, she'll go through what those tools are specific to you and how we're going to save all of the excess money or half of the excess money. And all they need to know is if it was a married couple, it's all of the excess money. If it's single person, it's about half of the excess money. So they didn't have to give legal advice. They just had to say, do you want to save the excess or do you want to spend it on nursing home care? I want to save it. Great. Sign here and we'll get you into a strategy meeting with the lawyer. So that started working very well as well. And so then the last piece was just the estate planning piece. That didn't work as well for me. I can't say that I ever really learned it well, or I should say I never really implemented it well with non-attorney staff members, but I have lots of colleagues around the United States that do that piece very well with non-attorneys.
Yeah, I've met a lot of attorneys who have non-attorneys doing the sales, doing the closing, doing the consults. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that'd work for every practice area, but it certainly works in some, but a lot of lawyers are scared to do it. But, it sounds like it worked for you. And I imagine that sort of let those sorts of insights and changes, led you down the path to where you eventually, had your firm ready to sell. And so let's talk about that, or if there's anything else you want to add, but.
Well, I would say that, yes, it did lead it to the path of sale. And I think what you're alluding to is that at that point, the firm was not dependent on me to make money or do the production of the work. And that then becomes a very sellable firm.
Yeah, I tell lawyers, the less the firm depends on you, the more valuable it becomes.
Yeah. Well, it depended on me for the vision, right? They still saw me as the leader. I was the visionary. They bought into the vision and wanted to create the results for our clients. And so as leader with the vision, then I was also responsible for, holding people accountable to performing so that we could get those results, right? And so to me, that's the Holy Grail.
And also, that's a great point. As the owner of the business, no one is ever going to care about it as much as you do. You can set up all sorts of incentive structures and they can do a lot of the work, but I really feel like there has to be an owner that drives the business. Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. Now, maybe if you get really big like Warren Buffett, you can put in a really strong CEO that you align incentives and they can go. Maybe that's doable, but yeah, you're right. The vision, the owner, they're the ones that has that usually. But let's talk about the sale of your firm. So, tell us about how that came about and how you decided that's something you wanted to do.
So there were a few different moments. when it crossed my mind heavily. The very first time it crossed my mind was when my wife and I were going to adopt a child, and we went to Texas to do that. And we were with that child for 2 days, and then the 16-year-old decided to change her mind in the 23rd hour, and she only had 24 hours to do it, and she, in the 23rd hour, the hospital called us at the hotel right when we were about to walk out and said, "Don't come." And what I spiraled at that moment was, she is choosing, based on conversations we had with her, she is choosing a life of poverty for this child, which means being on Medicaid, versus placing the child in a household that could not only love her but provide for her, and also still have a relationship with the birth mother and that family. And that's a choice that she was making. And I couldn't go back to my law firm and still help people get on Medicaid, choose Medicaid. I just couldn't do it. It was incongruent with me at that time. So at that time, I had 2 associates. I went to them, and they were both with me for about a year at that point. And I said to them, I said, this is what's going to happen. Over the next year or 2, you're going to feel like you can do this on your own and you don't need me, because that's what young associates do. You get big pants. And so I said, so you have an opportunity to do that here. You have an opportunity to become a partner in the next year or 2. And so I will mentor you and train you up for that. What I'm thinking in my head, though, is I need to get out of here, so I need to train them to be the owners, not just partners. But I didn't position it that way. And so one of them was gone within a year. The other one became my partner. And it was after he became my partner, and he is a wonderful lawyer, a wonderful person, but not a wonderful owner, okay? And so after becoming an owner for a year or 2, I can't remember how long it was obvious that the firm was going to fail based on reputation that has now been spoiled. And so I kept having to give refunds and repair things with people. And so I realized I really do care about this firm, and I do care about what we do here. We help people live better lives because of what we help them get, to include the Medicaid. So that kind of recharged me of, what we do is actually very important for families and people's livelihoods. So that recharged me. So I stayed for a while, and then I got a bit burned out. But, there is a difference between getting burned out and wanting to get out. Just people don't always understand that. And so when you're burned out, you want out. But being burned out is fixable, okay? Absolutely wanting out is not fixable. So when I realized I was burned out and I just wanted someone else to manage the firm for me, I didn't think about selling. I just thought, I need someone to manage. So that'd be like a professional legal administrator or a COO, right? So I was looking for that role. And so then I was hiring for that role. And when I did the personality testing on one of the applicants, the personality tester said, she's going to want to take over the firm at some point. And he said it like it was a bad thing. And I was like, oh, like in 3 months from now or 3 years from now? And he's like, yeah, that I don't know. And I'm like, okay. So I filed that away and I hired her. And but what really happened then, as far as the sale, was I was where I knew I had to get out, and I was not burned out. I just needed to get out. And that was, I'm a veteran, as I've already shared, and it was Veterans Day. And I was going to do a presentation at an assisted living facility like I had done many years. And these are my people. Old people are my people, right? And veterans even more so. And so I'm not even on the stage yet. And this woman in the front row starts heckling me. And I just did not have the appropriate thoughts in my head. And then it occurred to me, if this is my reaction, then I don't need to be here anymore. I am not doing good for my community if this is my reaction. So that's when I made the decision, I need to sell. And so then I waited until my professional legal administrator ultimately showed that she wanted to take over the firm. And so at that point, I had a discussion with her and I said, there's an opportunity here. I do want to sell the firm. It'll either be to a third party or it'll be to you. I'll give you the first opportunity. And then we closed on the firm 3 months later.
Awesome. So how did you structure that in terms of, payment? How long were you there afterwards? Not that you don't have to tell us the amount, but just sort of how was it structured?
Yeah. So so at closing, I received one check that was 6 figures. 30 days later, I received another check that was 6 figures. And then for 18 months thereafter, it was supposed to be 24 months thereafter, but I received the same monthly payment every month for 24 months. And my obligation was to be there for 24 months, but on a sliding scale down as far as my time. So I started off with, for example, 20 hours a week, then went down to 16 hours a week, then 8 hours a week, then I was just on call. I ended up being 18 months because at 18 months, we were both like, why am I still here? And she's like, I know, why are you still here? And I'm like, well, I'm here because I want to get paid, under our obligation. And so that's why I say it was supposed to be 24, but we shortened it to 18. We just kind of accelerated it. And so, I was kept on really for just guidance to her. So if she had any questions and things like that, to make her feel comfortable and secure, and also to create marketing materials and policies and procedures, things like that. And really to help the staff feel comfortable that I'm still around because they liked me. And so, we needed to assure them that I wasn't just going to leave. And so they saw less of me over time. And so, it was kind of like weaning a baby off of you, kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay.
So you sold, you left, you're running Quid Pro Quo now, which is, I think you help do a number of different things. I think maybe you coach lawyers on how to get ready to sell. You help broker the deals or find the deals. And then you also do evaluations. Did I get that right?
Right. Yes.
So, I talk to a lot of lawyers. I'm sure you have too. Of course, by the time they get to you, they're thinking about, hey, I want to sell this thing. But a lot of lawyers I talk to, they can't imagine that they could sell their firm. And maybe for a lot of them, they couldn't in the current state of the firm. But what would you say to those law firm owners out there that think they cannot sell their firm?
First of all, I would say, don't presume anything. It costs very little to talk with someone about what are the options and the possibilities, right? And also understand that there's a difference between selling a book of business and selling an actual business. And when you don't feel like you have an actual business because it's just you're a sole practitioner, and those are the ones that really think like, I can't sell this without me, there's nothing. Well, there's still something. There's a phone that rings. You might have a website that people go to once in a while. And then there's certainly a history of clients and a database that you might have that you might be tight with because you're sending out those monthly newsletters. Or maybe you're not. Maybe it's really cold, but somebody's willing to at least pick that up and revive it. There's value in that. Now, how much value has to do with a lot of different things, but there's still something, right? I mean, so like someone that I've been working with sold their book of business for basically $10,000 and a revenue stream for 3 years based on what comes off of that book of business. Well, that's not nothing, right? I mean, one person I spoke with that a couple years ago that was not my client, she sold her business for, I think it was like $10,000 or $15,000, and that's it. And her only goal was, I just want to pay off my credit cards and have a little bit extra so that I can start my next thing. So, when we say sell a business, it doesn't mean it has to be for $1 million, but it can be for something. So we just have to figure out what is that something, right? Now, I don't help always. Like, I don't act as representative if somebody necessarily is going to go out there and, I only want $5,000. I could have a consultation with them. I could tell them all the things they need to do and how to do it, and I'm happy to do that. But obviously, they're not going to want to pay my fees that we charge to sell something for $5,000, right? But I recently, Jonathan, just closed on a $1.3 million law firm where 82% of it was cash up front. I just went under contract with another firm that is $1 million, 100% cash up front. Now, I can't say that's also the norm, cash up front, but I'm here to change the industry. And that is part of changing the industry, is doing it differently. And that means coming with cash up front.
Yeah. My attitude and what I tell people, it's, even if you think you don't want to sell, or even if you're not sure you want to sell, it's worth it to try to position the firm in ways that it could be sold. And, if you do that, and I want to ask you some of those ways, but if you do that, it makes the firm, I think, more enjoyable to run. It probably makes it more profitable while you're there. And then you have the option. You don't have to, but you got the option. So if for lawyers out there that have their practice, a couple of things, when should they start getting it ready, and what sorts of things would you recommend they do to get it ready for that potential sale one day?
So I would say that when you start your law firm is when you start getting it ready for sale.
So right.
From the beginning. But short of that, like I got an email, this morning that said, I'm looking to sell in 3 to 5 years. Is it too soon to talk to you? It's never too soon, because there's always something you can do to make it better, right? And so the question is, what is the end result you want out of this? Do you want profit or do you want peanuts, right? And so if you're happy just closing the door, then close the door. You don't need to do anything. But and when I say that tongue in cheek, because even when you wind down, it is not an easy process.
It takes
right?
a while, yeah.
It does. And so I would say that at a minimum, depending on, just at a minimum across the board, you should be doing something 3 years in advance. But the state of your firm, are you a sole practitioner? Do you have employees? Do you have associates? All those things will have an effect on truly the runway that you need in order to position it for sale. The other thing too is you can do everything right to position it for sale. And at that point, someone will ask me, okay, well, how quickly do you think it'll sell? Well, that's a whole other set of characteristics that you have to say, so like I had to tell one of my clients the other day, I said, you do immigration law, and while you have a great firm, you have great profit, there's a lot of immigration lawyers for sale right now, so yours might take longer than, for example, an estate planning firm that tends to sell very quickly. And so your practice area may also dictate when you need to get started based on when you actually want to exit, and the runway after you're positioned to actually find the right buyer.
Okay, so you get it positioned and you're trying to find a buyer. What sorts of ways do you go about finding the buyers? How does an owner do that?
So a lot of them, when they're doing it on their own, they'll start talking to people at bar association events and, just reaching out to colleagues to say, I'm retiring. Would you consider buying my firm? In fact, that's how I got my very first client at Quid Pro Quo. Was I had sold my firm and I was still at my firm, in that transition period. And I got a call from one of my colleagues. And she said, hey, Victoria, I'm looking to sell. And I thought I was going to sell to my associate. But at the 11th hour, he came to me and he said, I just can't do it. I can't buy it. I don't feel ready. I don't feel like an owner. And she said, so now I want to look at outside third parties. And I just said to her, and I said, thank you. It's, first of all, an honor to even be asked, because this is someone's baby. You've got to trust who you're turning to, right? So I thanked her, and then I asked her lots of questions. And I told her, I said, I'm sorry, I can't buy it because I'm under a non-compete for the next however long. And I said, so then I started asking her questions, and she said, gosh, you've asked me more questions in the last 15 minutes than my broker has in the last 12 months. And she said, do you do this? And I said, I do now. So she was my first client. And we had her, within 2 months, I had her a buyer and we closed. So she hired me in February. We closed in September of that same year. So
nice.
Yeah. And she got 100% of her money up front.
That's nice. So you help people find buyers, sell, whatever, but you also do the valuations. I want to dig into that a little bit. I get a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. What's my firm worth? And I lots of factors, I'm sure, but in your opinion, what are some of the top 1, 2, 3 to 5 factors that drive value. And then if I'm a law firm owner, if I'm trying to think, how do I drive the value other than, obviously revenue, profits, but are there other levers that I could pull to really drive the value?
I would say number one is know your data. If you know how many prospects call per week or month, how many of those become clients, and what's your average case value, and what percentage of your clients are in each category that you sell. For example, estate planning. How many of those are wills versus trusts, right? Because a buyer is going to look at that, because a buyer might be like, we don't do wills. So if you're 80% wills and you only do 20% trust, I don't want to buy you. But if it's flip, then I might want to buy you. So knowing the data so you can go through prospects fast and easy, okay? Because it's emotional going through all that kind of stuff. You get in there, they're excited, and they're like, I wish we could have seen this data from the beginning, then we wouldn't have wasted all of our times. So number one is know your data and be able to verify that. Number two is have clean profit loss statements. I sold a law firm. It was miserable for me because they didn't even have any profit loss statements. They had no bookkeeping system whatsoever. She literally handed me her check register on 3 bank accounts and said, here's my income and expenses. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And this is a firm that was making like 600,000+, right? And had been in business for 30 years. Wow. And I was like, so when I went to sophisticated buyers, they were all like, Victoria, really? And I'm like, well, you can get a good deal. And so what it meant was, it didn't mean that, it wasn't sellable, but it meant that the sophisticated business owners who own law firms that wanted to expand, they were going to offer such deep discounts. So or not buy it at all, okay? So what we ended up doing in that situation was, I went through several of those sophisticated people, and then ultimately we sold it to somebody who was not sophisticated, who was just as unsophisticated, and who didn't know how to dig deep, and basically just took it. It also means that the seller in situations like that are going to self-finance. Generally, nobody's going to come up with money up front when your financials are in disarray. Another firm that I sold, they hadn't done their taxes in 3 years. And they hadn't done their taxes in 3 years because they didn't have a bookkeeping system. They had a system, but it was dependent on the owner to input everything and then categorize, because all their personal and their professional was all going through. Then they had to categorize everything. And she was in such paralysis that she just couldn't do it. It was so overwhelming. And I said, if I'm going to work with you to sell your business, you have got to hire someone who can get this in order within the next 6 months so we can move forward, because I'm not going to work for you if I'm waiting on you to get this stuff done. So it cost them more money, obviously, at this point, and we ultimately did sell it. But the P&Ls and the financials just in disarray. So that's number two.
What about like past client lists? How valuable are those typically? Or, I'm sure it depends, but...
Of course it does. So, past client lists, there's two things that make it valuable or not. Number one is, what type of practice are you in, right? So, for example, PI, personal injury, their past list is probably not as valuable as, for example, an estate planning firm. Because PI, you have to wait till they get sick again, right? Or injured. And that's, who wants that? Nobody. There's just not a whole lot of recidivism there. But estate planning, on the other hand, I literally could rattle off for you right now 6 different opportunities within an estate firm for one client to go through in the life of a client. Okay, 6 different opportunities. Plus, there's other firms, there's certain types of firms that lend themselves well for client maintenance programs where clients are paying whether they need your services or not. And those are good, hot client lists right there, right? If you've got people on a client maintenance program, that's a hot list, and that is worth a lot. So let's just assume that all of our client lists are worth something. Then what makes the difference between whether they're valuable or less valuable is how often do you stay in touch with them? Do they open your emails that you send? Do they take action based on that? The very first firm I sold, she had her data and she said, we send out a monthly newsletter via email. Our open rate is 52%. Our take action rate is 38%. That data, that's a database that is worth something.
Yeah.
Versus I'm still on Time Matters, which isn't even in the cloud, and I haven't touched these people for 30 years, but here's the database. I don't know if their numbers are still good or not. I don't know if we have their email or not, but go ahead and you can mine it all day long. So when you're looking to buy something like that, you got to look at it from a marketing standpoint. What would I pay for that same lead if it was just as sparse as what you're telling me? And how much money and resource do I want to put into, crafting this database list that you say you have of 20,000 prior clients?
Yeah, and I mean, you had your print newsletter that you were actively sending folks to, so you could just keep sending the newsletter if you bought that list, where if you'd never contacted them in 30 years and you just start sending stuff, they're going to be like, who is this?
Correct. Well, and also just to add from the newsletter standpoint, we had a different trackable number on our newsletter. So not only could I say we're sending this out to 8,700 people, of those 8,700 people, our phone number that's tracked on that rings X percent, within 7 days of us sending it out, so there's other elevated data that you can get on your efforts.
That's good data. Yeah, that's good data. So let's shift. So, somebody's out there, you've helped people sell their firms. What are some of the typical structures you see in the sales? And by that, I mean, internal versus external, lump sum payment and you're gone the next day, earn out, seller financing, that sort of thing. What have you seen and maybe what are you seeing?
Well, first of all, I rarely see anyone that's just gone the next day. Even if it is a lump sum up front, there's generally a transition period. I'd say at a minimum 3 months, but most often I see 6 months to 12 months. And that's whether it's an outside party or an inside associate buying in. I personally have had more experience with outside third parties coming in to buy firms. And that's probably because the people who hire me are looking for outside third parties because they either don't have associates or their associates just aren't the right kind of person to become the owner. So I see a lot of that. And with regard to compensation structures around that, obviously my goal is to get as much money up front as possible, especially if I'm representing the seller, which I most often do. And so we are looking generally for an SBA loan. And there's a particular company that I'm aligned with that they are the largest SBA lender in the United States. They have such a smooth process and they have a department that just works with lawyers, that funds law firms. So when someone's expanding their law firm because they already have one and they're buying another one, if they get this SBA loan, for example, they can come in with no money down and then extend their payment over 10 years, which makes the cash flow very easy. It's a no-brainer.
Wow.
So I love that arrangement. Secondarily, what we see is a down payment of a certain amount, generally anywhere from 20 to 50%, and then seller financing for the rest of it. And I would not call that an earnout. I would just call that payment over time. The other arrangement that I see at least offered a lot, and I'm trying to get away from our industry altogether, is the earnout. And that's where I agree to pay you either a percentage of revenue that comes in over time, or I pay you based on a set price of the firm, but only if we hit certain benchmarks, right? And so you still have to, as the seller, be responsible for helping us hit those benchmarks. Well, the seller wants out. The seller doesn't want to be staying and helping with the benchmarks. So I think it creates a bitter relationship. And so I absolutely hate it. Fewer than 30% of all businesses worldwide have earnouts, and I think that it doesn't make sense in our world either, so I don't like those. Now, I do get involved on the buy side frequently. Usually that's associates buying in or buying the firm that they're at, and they just want to make sure, am I getting a good deal? How can I communicate and negotiate on the same power plane as the current owner? And so I help in those ways as well.
So I'm going to shift again. We mentioned this earlier. You're looking in Arizona. So, obviously that's where we have, I guess, the new leader of non-attorney owned law firms. What are you seeing out there, or are you seeing anything yet with non-attorneys buying law firms?
So, first of all, as of January of this year, there were 67 non-attorney owned law firms in Arizona. And for the most part, what I see is that it's businesses that already exist somewhere else that are legal tangents or something, that they want to be able to have, a legal piece to it. And so then they just move into Arizona and do that. So I'm not seeing that they're buying law firms. I'm seeing that they're creating them to support their other businesses, like what I'm doing, essentially. So I'm not seeing a lot of non-lawyers buying law firms. I will say this, that when I have put law firms for sale on a listing site that is for all businesses, I have a lot of non-lawyers who inquire about law firms that we have for sale. And of course, the first question I have to ask is, do you have anyone on your team that is a lawyer that's going to be the owner of this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, then I can't talk to you. So I think there could be interest out there, especially from these equity groups, but I don't think they know the rules yet. And so, so I think there's interest. There's just not the possibility yet other than in Arizona.
So, you drop a question like this in a room full of lawyers, and you're going to have two camps probably fiercely fighting each other. What are your views on opening it up to ownership to non-lawyers?
I am 100% pro non-lawyer ownership is and can be a positive thing for our industry. I think that first and foremost, the lawyers who are entrepreneurial and what we would call business owners who own law firms already, they have a law license, but they're not doing the law stuff anymore. They see the benefit of the different roles within a business and operate the business accordingly. And I would say that, other than providing legal advice, everything else in a law firm business can and should be done by someone who's a non-lawyer. That includes the sales. That includes the marketing. That includes, the production. That includes post-production. And so, the arguments against it is that, the business will start offering things that are not suitable for the client because it's all about profit. Well, first of all, a law firm should be about profit. It is a business, right? And if you just want to, we can do good and still profit. The more we profit, the more people we can serve. And I think that's been one of the biggest things about lawyers is, I'm just here to help people. I'm here to help people too. And I can do it without the influence of no matter how much money I make or don't make, right? In fact, I can serve my clients better when I don't have to worry about if I'm going to be able to, put food on my table. So I'm a big proponent of it and really thinking about who should be doing what and how can we better serve our customers and our clients, and can we serve more of them when we have the right people doing the right tasks and activities. I think that what holds us back is our ego and history and tradition and the ways that we've been brought up through the legal profession to say that, we have to do it all. Because we're lawyers and we're smarter than everybody else. Well, that's not true. None of it.
Well, I think it's coming. Whether people want it to or not, I do think it's coming. I think the cracks are there, and it's inevitable. It may take a couple decades to go everywhere, but I think it's coming. Well, Victoria, I appreciate you coming on. There's been a lot of cool stuff, helpful information you've given us. If people are out there, I guess two things. Number one, if anyone gets in touch with you, what's the best way? And then number two, who are your ideal clients? Who do you want to work with?
Sure, great. So they can reach us at quidproquolaw.com. That's our website, and they can find out what we do there. And if you're looking to buy a law firm, we have our listings there on our website, so just take a look at that. But our primary client are those that make more than $500,000 gross and that they want to sell their law firm between now and 5 years from now. They understand that they may need to make some changes if they want to get, a great price for it. And they're willing to take guidance and direction in that. And so our perfect client is those that understand the value of an actual valuation by someone that just works in the legal space, because how you value a law firm is not how you value a dry cleaner or a software company or anything like that. So it's professionals who understand the value of professionals.
Well, thanks again, Victoria, for coming on. I've learned a lot,
Thank
and
you.
I think everybody else probably has too.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.yourlawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.